Do you want some ideas to step up your ink blending with supplies you probably already have in your stash? Pull out those inks and brushes. Hi, I'm Jess from jesscrafts.com, and I'm going to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. Today I'm going to do 3 ink blended panels, and then I'm going to emboss, dry embossing with embossing folders over the ink blended panels, and share some ideas for how this can add some interest to your ink blended backgrounds. I think that you could do any of these ink blending techniques, leave it as is, add a sentiment the same way I do, finish them off the same way. You could skip the embossing and it would still be a great card. But doing the dry embossing with embossing folders helps to really add some additional interest to the cards. I have masked off a stripe down the center, or down off-centered on this card, and I am using Neenah Solar White 80-pound Classic Crest, which is what I normally use for Copic coloring. I do not think it is the best cardstock for ink blending. I would prefer Strathmore Bristol Smooth for ink blending. However, I had run out and did not realize it at the time. So when I had this idea and wanted to give it a try, I used what I had. But I then made a trip and got some more of the Bristol Smooth because I think that is a really solid cardstock for ink blending. I am working on a Waffle Flower stencil mat, which is a silicone mat. It will stain, and so you can see there's old ink on it, but it has a non-slip sort of surface, and it holds your paper fairly well. I don't know that I would ever not also tape my paper down if I were working on something very precise. But it does have some grippiness, whereas previously I probably would have used my Ranger craft sheet. The Ranger craft sheet is excellent for ink blending. It wipes off clean because it's basically a glass surface, but you can roll it up. However, your paper goes slip sliding everywhere on it. And so you're more likely to, if you're trying to blend an entire ink panel, you'd have to hold your panel down, and even trying to tape it to that surface doesn't work very well because the surface is so slippery that the tape often doesn't stick to it. But Ranger Craft Sheet's great too. Used it for years. I'm not even saying I wouldn't recommend it. This is just a little bit more friendly for the camera too. But that ink, that silicone mat will stain. It stains less with distress inks, a little bit more with distress oxides. And then if you use just standard dye inks that aren't water reactive, it stains the most. And that's just that those water reactive inks are going to clean off a little bit more because they're meant to react with water. They're a little bit more washable. With the first one, masked off to the strip. Now I'm just doing a sort of more pure simple ink blending where I am just pulling some color up and letting it fade out. This one you probably could emboss first and then try to do this fade out, but I don't think it gives the same look. I think you're able to get a softer, more gradual fade out if you do it on the paper first and then you add your embossing. If you emboss first and then try to ink blend, often the raised areas will catch ink in a different way than the non-raised areas, and so it doesn't give that smooth blend out. For my final panel, I am just going to mask off one section of it on a diagonal to add a little bit of interest. I am picking just kind of random color combinations in the sense of I was just I wanted them to be a little bit different, show you a little bit different ideas with each one, and let the colors stand out. I had recently done a project that I shared over on Instagram with primary colors, sort of, because it was pink, blue, and yellow instead of red, blue, and yellow. But I was just enjoying that color combination, and so I decided to do one panel in each of those color families. I am using Distress Oxide inks because it's what I have, but Distress inks would work great. The only other set of inks I have are Lawn Fawn inks, which also would blend out just fine. So you use your favorite inks and your favorite embossing folders. But I do want to share what the embossing folders that I'm using. These are from Spellbinders. Spellbinders has an embossing folder of the month club. And this is not something, if you had asked me a year ago, I would have said no way would I join an embossing folder of the month. I just didn't really use embossing folders. But Spellbinders came out with this size of embossing folder that is, I think it's like 6x9 or so. They'll be linked in the video description, but it works for slimline cards. It works for 5x7 cards. It works for A2 size cards, both horizontally and vertically, so you can fit it either way. And sometimes with directional embossing folders in the past, they only fit this, like, they barely fit an A2 size card. Or if they fit a 5x7, you still can't turn it on its side, so you're kind of stuck only using it one way. I really like these substantially sized embossing folders from Spellbinders. They're still relatively inexpensive, but they give you so many more options. Once with the panel that I let fade out, I am going to come back and add a bit more ink to really emphasize the embossing. And also there were areas where the embossing did crack the color a little bit, and that allows me to, cracked the paper a little bit, which allowed some of the white paper, the core of the paper, to show through. And by putting some more putting more ink on top of it, I was able to fix that. Here, I did a partial ink blending where I only inked the corner. I'm going to do a partial embossing. So I'm only going to stick the part of the panel that I already blended ink on into my embossing folder, and then I'll run it through my machine, and so only that part will be embossed. And now I'm going to take a slightly darker blue, and I'm going to very gently rub my ink blending tool over the embossed area and allow that to make that embossing stand out even more. I'm not doing like a full-on rubbing of the panel, just a very light back and forth, so we'll catch mostly the raised areas and help emphasize that embossing design and pattern. So the embossing folder of the month, this is my fourth one, and so far I've been happy with all the designs. There's a nice mix of like floral and geometrics, and they just provide a really subtle little background for a clean and simple card. And now that I've kind of gotten back into it and I feel less restricted by them, I'm eager to explore more techniques that involve embossing folders. So if you have like a favorite way of using embossing folders, please share it in the video description, because I'd love to see other people's ideas. And I'm sure anybody watching this video would love to know more ways to use their embossing folders as well, because that's why they, clicked on this video to begin with. This is also from Spellbinders. It's a thank you die. There are 2 sets of the word thank you, or words thanking you, in the die set. One has a very slight embossing to it, and one is solid. And it's meant so that you could lay the embossed one slightly underneath and create a sort of 3D effect. That's really cool, but it's just not how I'm using it today. Today I want to use the embossed thank you and just that solid. I'm going to do it in black, and I put my ink blended embossing panels on a black mat just so that those really bright colors that I chose will pop. It will really emphasize that inking embossed combo, and then the black words will tie in the black mat, and I will make sure that I overlap them with the ink blended area so that they stand out really well, and they won't need a shadow die, because I will often use a shadow die when I am using words so they pop off a bit more, but that's not necessary in this instance. So I took the solid one and I layered it underneath the embossed one just so that it had a little bit more dimension, and then I glued it down with some Barely Art liquid glue over the inked areas on these cards. If you found this video inspiring, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.